Hey everybody, today we're going to finish up the big bobber from Planeprint and get ready for the Maiden Flight. I'll be using all electronics that Planeprint recommends in their PDF file for this build, and I'll be leaving all the links in the description below so you guys can order all your parts. I had a problem with the motor mount that I got with this motor. It was a little bit too large, so I had to modify it to fit into the big bobber. If you guys are doing this, you can use a piece of plywood, would work just fine too. 1/8 inch plywood. You can modify it to whatever size that you need to, or if you just order this bracket, you can do exactly what I'm doing. Once I have this motor mount modified, I'm just going to install the motor with 2 screws and just check it without any glue and just make sure it fits into the fuselage. Now I'll just add glue to these motor mount pieces and insert it into the fuselage. Make sure that they're pushed all the way back into the slots, and then I'll add more glue to make it stronger. For the ESC, the connector that it comes with for E-Flight batteries doesn't work for the battery that I'm going to use, so I'm just going to cut off that connector and solder on a new XT60 connector for my battery. For now, just to assemble the airplane, we're going to set up our controller just to run a few things, servos and stuff, so we can get everything set up correctly. Before we fly it, we'll do a couple more adjustments to the controller to get it set right. So we'll create a new file, name it, and then we're going to set up the aircraft type. I'm going to do 1 aileron, 1 flap, and then a normal tail. And then select your image. I'm doing 1 aileron, 1 flap because I'm going to set it up in a Y harness, so I can use a 6-channel receiver and 6 transmitter. We'll set up our flap switch to switch B. We'll set up our throttle cut because we'll be working with this on the bench. We want to make sure that we got that set up. Before we install the motor and the ESC, you want to make sure that the motor is spinning the proper direction. For this setup, the prongs are labeled, color-coded, but for most brushless motor and ESCs, they don't have color coding on there. So you want to set up your controller, set up your battery, and then spin the motor and make sure that it spins the correct direction with the direction that the prop's supposed to be going. Once we have that set up, we can just leave the ESC and the motor connected, and then we'll add the motor mount to the motor, and we'll install the motor into the fuselage. I'll be using an E-Flight 12x4 prop, and I'll go ahead and just spray paint the prop tips. I'll also use a piece of Velcro to insert the ESC into the fuselage. I'll be using 7 Emax ES08 Alpha servos. I'm using 7 of them so I can hook up the tow hook release for the glider. But if you're not going to hook that up, you only need 6 servos. So again, while we hook up our transmitter and our receiver, so we can test out these servos and get them in the center position while we put the control horn onto the servo. Because we want the control horn to be facing up once you install these servos into this bracket. So we just have them hooked up to the receiver, hooked up to the transmitter, so that way we can get those servos centered, and then we can fine-tune and adjust them once they're actually in the plane. I'll be using these 2mm push rod connectors to install the carbon rods to the servos. Just going to need to drill out the holes a little bit in the servo arms for these push rod connectors to go on there. And then once I put the nut on there, I just put a little dab of CA glue and spray it with CA accelerator to keep the nut from unscrewing off there. And these are 1.5mm carbon rods. I want to tighten down these rod connectors. I'll just use a pair of pliers and hold it, and then use the Allen wrench to tighten that down. Okay, now we'll start working on the wing. So we'll use 4 servos for the wing. For both the ailerons and the flaps, you can set them up in a Y-harness configuration with no modification to the airplane. Just build exactly how I'm building it here and how Planeprint has it set up in their PDF file. And you do not have to do any modifications, and you can hook up both the flaps and the ailerons on a Y-harness. And that's what I do because I'm using a 6-channel receiver, because I'm using the 6th channel for the tow glider hook. And so I'm going to hook up the Y-harness for the flaps and the ailerons. For cutting these pieces out, you can do this once they come off the printer, or you can do them now if you want to. I'm using a hot knife to cut out those pieces, and then I just use a regular knife just to clean them up a little bit. So we'll again hook up our battery and our transmitter and make sure that the servos are centered and positioned correctly for the flaps and the ailerons. And then we'll just go ahead and install the screws. And for the aileron servo, we're going to need a little bit of an extension for that. So we'll just put a little bit of an extension on there. And I actually put a little piece of masking tape on that connection because when I first pulled it through, I actually pulled it off of the servo. So just put a little piece of tape on there to keep that wire from pulling off of the servo once it's inside the wing. To set up the controls, we're going to go ahead and use a piece of masking tape and tape the aileron to the wingtip and wrap it around the top part of the wing, and that way it'll keep that aileron in the center position. And then we'll go ahead and set up our control horns for the ailerons. So we'll put those push rod ends on there, put a little glue on there, and spray them with CA glue like I said before. We'll use Z-bend pliers for the end that connects to the servo. I'm using 1mm wire for the ailerons and the flaps, so I'm going to hook up the end that goes on the servo first, and then I'll glue the control horn to the aileron. Okay, now we'll connect the battery and make sure the servo is centered. With the aileron taped to the wingtip, we can go ahead and tighten down this control, and that will have the aileron nice and level with the wingtips, and the servo is in the center position. Now I'll go ahead and set the flaps up. So again, we'll use Z-bend pliers, hook that to the control horn on the servo, and then we'll tape the aileron to the flap now, and that will center the flap in the correct position. And then once we have that set, we'll go ahead and tighten down these control horns on the flaps, and then both the ailerons and the flaps are nice and centered. And that's too much movement for the flap, but we'll adjust that in a little bit. Okay, just have a couple more things to finish up before we can set the CG. We'll set these marker lights up, so I'm just going to go ahead and paint them and then glue them on the wingtips. And we'll install this string to the tail. So to install this, make it a little easier, I just added a little CA glue to the end of the string, and then it goes through the holes a lot easier in the tail. And then we'll just bring that around both sides and tie it down to the bottom portion of the fuselage. I'll be using the AR620 Spectrum receiver, so I'll just install that with a piece of Velcro, and then I'll glue this wire clip in place, and I'll tidy up all the wiring. And I'll be using 2 Y harnesses, one for the flaps and one for the ailerons, so I'll connect those up. Okay, now we'll go ahead and set the CG. So we'll get this battery tray all cleaned up, and we'll make a piece of Velcro for the strap for the battery. And then I'm going to also add a piece of Velcro to the bottom of the battery to keep it from sliding back and forth when it's in that tray. And then we're just going to add a good amount of glue to the bottom of this battery tray, and then we'll insert that into the fuselage, and we'll just slide it back and forth until you get the CG right. And the CG is marked on the bottom side of the wing. Okay, the last 2 things we gotta do is do the dashboard and the windshield. So for the dashboard, we're gonna put packing tape over top of the dashboard, and that'll waterproof it a little bit. And then for the back side, we're gonna put removable poster tape on the back, and then we'll cut the shape out, and we'll pull the sticky off the back and install it into the fuselage. For the windshield, I'm just gonna use 0.2mm plastic, tape the plastic down to a template, and then cut it out to shape. When I was doing it, the removable poster tape did not work too well. It wasn't strong enough, so if you can find some stronger adhesive tape, definitely didn't work, so don't use this. But I ended up using just hot glue to glue this down to the fuselage. Just make sure that you don't use CA glue, because I do have experience using CA glue on plastic, and it definitely does not work. It like distorts the plastic and makes it all hazy and stuff. So you definitely don't want to do that. But like for the edge pieces, I just add a dab of glue, hot glue in there, and then just glue this piece on, and then glue the top part down also with hot glue. Before we want to take it out for main flight, we want to finish setting up our controller. So we'll just go to dual rates and expos and set the ailerons, elevator, and rudder to 30% expo, and then we'll set the servo travel up. So we'll go up to travel, and we'll set all these travels. So we'll set the ailerons and the flaps to the correct travel, and we'll do the rudder and the elevator also.
Thank you guys for watching this video. Hope it was helpful, and I'll have that for Maiden Flight soon.